Hi, I'm Regan Robinson, your host of Future Fit, the only podcast unraveling the secrets of how the world's most innovative leaders stay future ready in a fast-paced world. I've spent over 20 years as a futurist and strategist, transforming top global brands and putting investment-backed startups on paths to sustainable growth. Along the way, I've become obsessed with new ways to prepare for the future, because thinking about the long term once a year simply isn't enough. In each episode, I talk with movers, shakers, and path breakers who share their stories about how they turn uncertainty into their strategic advantage. Throughout our journey, we'll discover unconventional and imaginative ways to help you thrive today while leading your teams into tomorrow. Future Fit leaders know that being prepared for what's next is more than a business decision. It's a way of being. Let's venture together as we co-create a new future readiness playbook. The future can't wait, and neither can I. So, are you ready to get future fit? Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Tim Maleeny, an innovation leader who's known for pioneering a narrative approach to building integrated campaigns, which makes sense since he's the best-selling author of 6 novels. Tim is renowned for his expertise with achieving incredible new business growth and building award-winning cultures, and is the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for Havas, an integrated award-winning marketing and communications company. Founded in 1835 in Paris, Havas has more than 22,000 people in over 100 countries sharing one single mission: to make a meaningful difference to brands, businesses, and people, and has worked with top global brands such as IBM, Wells Fargo, and Keurig Dr. Pepper, among many others. As a strategist, Tim's campaigns have won at Cannes, the Effies, and the J. Chiat Awards, among many others. And he's formerly worked at Deloitte, RGA, and Ogilvy, and more. And he's an incredibly active mentor across the marketing community and serves as a mentor for women in power. Tim is redefining innovation, growth, and culture building like no one else. And so I'm incredibly excited to hear what he's going to enlighten us with today. So welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks so much. I'm incredibly excited to be here. It's great to see you again. And thank you for that incredible intro.
Well, you are an incredible guest. So well
we
deserved.
Shall see.
So let's get this party started with the question that I pose to all of my guests, which is, what does future ready mean to you?
I think if you want to be future ready, you have to stay curious and expect the unexpected. I think a lot of people get so obsessed with what's next or what's emergent that they fall in love with the technology at hand and the promise of what's tomorrow, and they lose their innate contrarian or skeptic. And you want to be excited about what's ahead, but you also want to look at it sometimes with a jaundiced eye and say, okay, is this really better? Is it just different? So I think you have to stay curious and always think about what's next, but also what's better than better, and kind of stay on your front foot.
I love that. Well, curiosity is obviously really important. Having a curious mind also, just by nature, means you're more open to the possibilities. And so I love how you also said, expect the unexpected. Like I feel like now, because I've been doing this work for so long, that like there's nothing that is unexpected in my view. It doesn't matter if it's my personal life, it's what's happening in the political environment.
You're just open to everything.
I am open to everything, and very few things surprise me, although that is an important emotion to remember when it comes to imagination and innovation. But nonetheless, really cultivating this capacity to expect the unexpected, I think it is a strategic advantage in many ways, because then you move through the world in a way that is much more nimble, which we'll get into a bit later, in a way that is, this sort of beginner's mindset,
Yeah, 100%.
So Ralph Waldo Emerson observed, "Do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." And that really resonates with me because, as I shared with you the last time we spoke, I have been an explorer and a contrarian since birth. And as a futurist and strategist, I'm always advocating for what if and what could be thinking. So building on our first conversation. And the reason why is it opens the aperture with a mindset that encourages a wide range of possibilities. And so
Sure.
I loved your Fast Company piece on why innovation teams need a resident contrarian, which you describe as an optimist and a skeptic tasked with predicting the future beyond the project in hand. But because innovation means different things to different leaders, first let's start with, what does innovation mean to you? And then why is contrarian thinking so important in this context?
I think innovation, which is a word that gets bandied about by so many people, sometimes without a lot of meaning behind it, is really just the quest to make something better. Innovation needs to have a purpose behind it. What are you trying to do? And in effect, you're changing something, and it might be a product, it might be developing something new, it might be behavior, in order to move things forward and in order to make things better. And the reason I mentioned having a resident contrarian is we see this all the time. A great dystopian science fiction novel written about, really as a cautionary tale about what could happen if we take this thing too far, if we pursue this too far. And then scientists turn around, misinterpret the book and say, hey, let's build that thing. Let's go invent that, right? And I think for companies, when it comes to adopting new technology, developing new processes, changing the way they do business or interact with their customers, you always want somebody on the team, and it shouldn't always be the same person, who kind of calls bullshit on the bullshit and says, yeah, does anybody really want that? Or what if that takes off so much that actually becomes bigger than we ever thought it would? That sounds great in the boardroom, but what are the downstream implications of that? Easy example, you look at social media.
Right.
Let's develop this as a platform where people come together and share it. Sounds lovely. Then, wow, you can monetize that platform. And all of a sudden, it becomes so addictive that it has huge and frankly catastrophic societal impacts, certainly on younger users and teens and teen girls and all of that. Could you have anticipated that? Yeah, you could have anticipated some of that. If you did, would you have done certain things differently? Yes. It's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. It's very hard to stop anything that can be done from being done, but channeling that in a constructive way to make sure that it's good for everybody is something that the resident contrarian should be tasked with. Just anticipate all the outcomes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important for people to understand that, again, it goes back to this exploring the possibilities around what could be or what if, whether it's more utopian or dystopian or something in between. Like I fundamentally believe that all the information is actually in front of us. Now, if we lived 100 years ago, I might have a different perspective, but at this point, it's all there right in front of us if we just open our eyes, right, and start to connect dots or imagine new configurations and then actually do the hard work of taking a step further. And what you said this before, what are the implications? Again, positive, negative, or neutral if this thing actually goes beyond maybe what our wildest dreams or maybe what the commercialization value is of this thing that we're trying to bring to the world. I think the other thing that comes up for me and what you shared is innovation is ambiguous. That's part of why I love it. And it's a process, it's a journey, and it's not an outcome. I mean, there is the noun innovation, right? But it's more about, right, how can we approach things with a different lens and create new value by thinking and doing things differently is really something that I think is important for people to understand.
Absolutely. You just said something I think is really important. If you look at 100 years ago, to your point, there were a number of different things that were emerging in society and in terms of technology. And some of those became dead ends. They became detours, and then a different path was chosen or different stuff caught on. And maybe some of that was out of left field and harder to predict. What's interesting now, to your point, is, I was saying this to somebody the other day, for the last 20 years, we've been in constant beta mode, right? Because the emergent tech is so on the cusp of where our behavior is or where we want it to be. So if I love talking to you and would rather not walk to a phone booth and put in a quarter or use the princess phone in my bedroom and hope you're home when I call, the idea of a cell phone is pretty attractive. So people, as soon as they were affordable, grab cell phones. And if you look at the first 10 years, coverage, dropped calls, the technology itself, it was clearly interim technology. And yet, because the desire to connect was so strong, people were willing to put up with that. But if the cell phones, the early cell phones had been airplanes, for example, you would never get on that plane, right? Every third one would drop from the sky.
Right.
It would be a disaster. And if you look at a lot of the tech that we're living with right now, and a lot of the tech that's coming via AI, we're in constant beta. So there's, to your point, a lot of stuff that still needs to be worked out. And it's a mistake to just rush in and say, oh, this is great. It's different. It might be better in some ways, but how do we iron out the rough patches as we go? Because we have to embrace this idea. You talked about being future ready. You have to have a continuous improvement mindset. You're never done, and it's never quite where it should be, even if it seems to be working just fine. And someone is going to observe that if you don't, if you're a business, and they're going to come in and disrupt your business because they're going to say, wow, that's great. And everybody was doing that. But what if? There's that what if you could make it even better or more seamless. And that's always going to happen. The other thing you said that I think is important when it comes to being kind of a resident contrarian is sometimes that has to do with something you or your team are working on. But sometimes it has to do, and again, I think we're seeing some of these discussions around the promise and the potential threat of AI on business is what is someone else, what is happening outside your company or outside your world that could affect you. So an easy kind of quirky historical example is when the iPhone got introduced and everybody suddenly had that device in their hands, chewing gum sales plummeted. They just plummeted almost overnight.
Wow.
And gum manufacturers were like, what the heck happened? Why isn't anybody buying gum? And it's because gum was often sold primarily in the checkout aisle in the grocery store. But now instead of looking around at the tabloids and the gum and saying, oh yeah, I could use some gum, people are looking at their phones, then they're checking out what the cashier says. So that's an unintended consequence of something that has nothing to do with your core business.
Yeah.
That if you anticipated that and you had some resident contrarian or resident technologist or futurist on your team, they might say, hey, we should change our distribution. We should change where we are in the store. We should promote ourselves differently because you may not see this coming, but it's going to hit your flank and it's going to negatively affect your business. So little things like that, I think you want to be on the lookout for quirky, unexpected outcomes because it can help you anticipate the unpredictable future in which we all live.
Yeah, when I think what you're saying around, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of subtleness that is happening all around us. And again, this is where I go back to, you just got to open your eyes and be intentional about it, right? And once we're taking in inputs 24 except for when we're sleeping, right? All the time, but there is a way that you can actually develop a really strategic and intelligent filtering system. This is what I've done over the years, even in your own mind around, okay, well, what are the outliers and what are the anomalies and what are the surprises and how can I harness those inputs? And then how can I harness contrarian thinking or diverse perspectives that are helping me see things that I'm not? Because one of the biggest mistakes I see leaders making all the time is narrowcasting and focusing on the familiar. You've got to get outside of what you already know, your industry, the people that you're talking to. And so that's why I advocate for, I don't care what size your company is, even if you're a company of 1 or a company of 10,000 or more, you need outside in thinking. It's really important.
No question. You always want people who look at things a bit laterally or non-linearly and can anticipate the possibilities. And that's the tension, right? Because human beings have great imaginations and they can get excited intellectually about the future, but behaviorally, most people crave stability, routine, comfort, and that's incredibly healthy and natural. But you have to sometimes kick yourself in the head, literally, to say, right, okay, get out of that comfort mode when you're thinking on behalf of your business or your product or your brand or what might happen, because a big part of you is saying, I like my routine, I like what I'm doing. But unless you imagine that other you who comes along and gives you that kick, you might be a little too complacent and a little too set in your ways to adapt quickly enough to keep up with what's going on or to take advantage of new opportunities. Everybody's brilliant in hindsight, right? And I think that you mentioned history. I think studying history, looking at history, especially when you look at the history of emergent technology, and that can be way, way back. Why were the Macedonians superior to the Greeks in battle? And what did they, there are different innovations that occurred. A lot of them had to do with technologies or different ways of doing things. But when you look more recently and you look at about post 20th century tech, there are patterns there. And when you start to see the patterns in the past, you can start to recognize them as they're happening around you. And that's just a helpful point of view in business. So you don't get caught by surprise, and you don't end up on your heels when everybody else in your business.
And nothing should be surprising. Even Bill Gates predicted the pandemic. So that wasn't even a surprise, is my very strong point of view. It's a hill I'm going to die on. We'll see how this battle goes. But, I'd love to pull on the history thread a little bit further, because as a historical nonfiction nerd, I have come to think of myself as much as an amateur historian, as a futurist. And that's because I seek to understand the bigger stories or themes and place what's happening today and what's on the horizon into a larger context. And history, as I'm sure you would agree, is a really rich tapestry woven with threads of human triumphs and struggles and innovations. And strangely enough, some people may think history can provide clues to the future. And so your Fast Company piece specifically also questions why are leaders not studying history when future-proofing their companies? And so I'm curious, how are you looking at history to get insights into future growth opportunities for Havas, or what your clients might need, and how are you applying them in your work?
Sure. It gets back to this idea that when you are thinking about working with a client on a business, and part of your job is, how do we tell your story right now? How do we position this brand? How do we stand apart from the competition? You're always looking, right? We're in the empathy and ideas business. And the empathy part comes in, who are we talking to really? Who's using this product? And you're quickly getting into behavioral questions. How is it used now? And if you look through that lens, you're that person and you're using this product. Is there anything that would make it better? Is there anything that would make you not use it? What's the worst case scenario and the best case scenario in this? And be equally open to both in terms of why you would or why you wouldn't in that sense. And then anticipate, as I said, both extremes, because in the best case scenario, if you do this and all this comes together, what else do you need if this becomes a bigger part of your lifestyle, or is one of those? We talk a lot about meaningful brands and what gives brands meaning. If it's an integral part of my life, it's part of my daily staple. You mentioned Keurig. If I've got that daily routine of coffee, what else surrounds that? And look at the adjacencies. An easy historical example, if you look at the advent of the iPhone, but then jump back to the advent of the Model T, there were a lot of things that could have been anticipated, even though the car was so, my God, there's this thing on four wheels. We don't need horses. What's going on? But again, back to the idea of living in beta, the Model T, the car, it was an aristocrat's novelty. Most people had horses, or most people were walking. And then they had trolleys and they had cable cars. And on the streets, they had horses and cable cars and cars, but nobody thought about traffic lights or lanes or turn signals or any of that, right? So needless to say, things were messy. There were a lot of catastrophic accidents. There were a lot of other things. Fast forward to the iPhone. When you have a product that is changing behavior or is integral to somebody's daily life, there's always peripherals, right? So you think about all the companies that cropped up in and around the iPhone, around carrying cases and cables and things like that. Apple left billions on it, as big as they are, as successful as they are, on the table, because they didn't really anticipate, whether it's from the MacBook in the early days to the iPhone, all the different applications and all the different things people would be doing on that. But also on the cautionary side, right? You have death by selfie. You have do not disturb while driving. It took them almost 10 years to get to some of those do not disturb features, even though if you sat down and said, hey, if I'm looking at this all the time and it's hitting my endorphins as I do, what's that extrapolated out going to look like? And what can we do? What can we do to either monetize that, put guardrails on it for the good of everybody, or protect our own company from our products being used in an unhealthy way?
Oh my gosh, there's so many gems in there, but the two things I want to highlight is first the behavioral lens. I think that's really important, particularly because, again, this is my personal perspective. I think tech is trendy. What is not trendy are human needs, motivations, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like that's actually enduring and been around since humans have been around. And I'm always advocating at looking at those from that lens and that perspective, and how are things that's happening around us, whatever they are, technology and so on, how is that eliciting behavior a change, and what patterns, you mentioned patterns, are we seeing that could create opportunities or challenges for my business? Like one of the examples I love sharing is in the mid 15th century, Johann Gutenberg invented a way to mass produce books, which ushered in an information revolution that spread info faster than it ever was before. And the debates and concerns that people had then are eerily similar to today's discussions and worries about fake news, bots, and how they skew public opinion. And so do you take a step back and say, all right, what is the larger pattern that I'm seeing here? And that is changes in fundamental information and communications infrastructure actually changes society in dramatic ways. And so what are the implications from that? And what can we learn from that? Like, what are the insights that we can then apply in a current context?
I think what you're saying too about fundamental human truths, I think sometimes that gets overlooked to your point because of what's trendy or what's new. And the reality is it does come back to those, it's almost like the Maslow's basic hierarchy, but exactly. There's certain things people always need and want. One of those things being human connection, and it's real human connection. And then looking at different things that have come before and say, is that similar? Whether that's in history, politics, technology, all of the above, or the convergence of those, because you'll see it's a zigzag pattern. It's never a straight line, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you look at, currency. Is that a currency? Is it not? Is it a fad? Does it exist? Does it not? If you start to look through history about different spin-off republics, different countries, suddenly now they have their own currency, now they don't. What was the role of currency? You can learn a lot from that, but then you look at things like the tulip craze, when everyone's buying, selling these things. Which is it? You have to decide, but you have to know both those things to put it in context. And I think that in a way, if you want to be a futurist, you have to both read history and read speculative science fiction. You have to read both in a way. Yeah. So you could be, spend time with Brave New World, and you quickly get to the extrapolated surveillance state that we're seeing in some countries. And that's the threat of the ubiquitous, I can turn on your phone's camera anytime and listen in on the microphone from the social media platforms. But then you look at history too, to your point about how people communicated, how they connected, how they kept tabs on each other in both good ways and bad ways. And those two bookends of what's ahead on the road and what's in the rearview mirror tell you where you are right now. And I don't think people take the time to do that homework and figure out the context in which they're existing right now. They just jump on what everybody says. Oh, this is so exciting. Yeah. A couple of years ago, it was everybody's going to be in the metaverse. And it's like, actually, no, everyone is not going to be in the metaverse. Right. And the metaverse you're talking about isn't really what the metaverse will be like. And we're not even in the interim technology phase of where that could go. Right. But because that was getting hyped, it was too early. Oh my God, everybody jumped into this thing that is an early indicator of what might be, but isn't really relevant day to day to most businesses. Yeah, well, that's why one of the other big mistakes I see leaders making, in addition to not just opening their eyes a little bit and doing the due diligence, as you're saying, and like getting curious and trying to learn is as much as you can and focusing on the familiar a lot of times I talk about what I do is like time travel, that I'm like living in the past, the present, and the future, but it's really about where I call them like paradigm shifts. Where are fundamental mindsets starting to change, starting to shift? Like that's, if this is new to you or work that you don't do day in and day out, maybe like we do, it's like, all right, we'll start there. What is happening? Where's society changing? Where's culture evolving? Because those will probably have a longer tail. And those paradigm shifts also represent what the world might be ready for on a much deeper, broader, longer way. And so those might be better opportunities versus, to your point, everybody jumping on the early iteration of metaverse, which it was way too early for it to actually be what it could be. 100%. And you said a couple of things that I think are really, really insightful. One, you mentioned tech is trendy, and you also mentioned the whole ambiguity of situations and ambiguity when it comes to evaluating tech or what's happening from an innovation standpoint. And I think the ambiguous nature of that is something that you have to keep in mind, because when you talk about tech is trendy, like right now, every third word, if you go to conferences or panels, is the two letters AI or some variation of generative AI and whatnot. And it's never all or nothing. Like, oh, this is great, or oh, this is scary. Yes, and both, maybe. Let's figure it out because of context. And you're seeing this with some industries, even back to technology from several years back. We're talking chatbots and we're talking about other digital interfaces. When they facilitate human interaction, fantastic. When they try to replace that, and I'm not just talking about the mad rush to eliminate jobs and save money to the bottom line, that's its own, topic that it's okay, where are we headed with that? But we've seen companies jump the shark on that, where the original voicemail system, so that something answered the phone and I'm not getting a busy signal or the phone isn't ringing, great. And then the goal of that was to get me to a person who could solve my problem. But that devolved into a digital buffer to keep you at bay and arm's length as long as possible, because they laid off so many people in the call center who could actually solve your problem.
Right.
Which led to a massive frustration and anger with a lot of companies. You think about interacting with the cable companies and the phone companies, and
yes.
It's all you can do not to yell. And it's not the fault of the person you ultimately get to, but there were and still are a lot of limitations on what that digital interface or digital assistant can do. So let's figure that out. And you see certain companies that do a really good job of that, where quick thing, hit this button, I'm to a person. It's directed me. I can go on the site, I can use a chatbot, or I can call you. It's on my terms and it's not on yours. And I think that's getting lost or obfuscated by a lot of companies and brands, because they're on this quest to either save money or tech is great, tech is good, look at us, we're powered by AI. I don't care if you're powered by AI. I want to know that I have a company that will deal with me and see me as an individual and treat me like a human being, whether it's your digital assistant treating me that way or an actual honest to God fellow human, which I kind of like. That's great. But I don't care what that's powered by. And if I got to that wonderful human or resolved my issue or bought that product because of AI, that's for you to figure out. I don't need to know that as part of your sales pitch. So please just stop talking about it.
Yeah, well, again, and that's where companies are, I believe, are too inside out, and they're organized how they want to be organized instead of orchestrated around the customer and the customer experience. Your customers, like, that's always a really great starting point if you're trying to figure out how to future ready your company. So
yeah, no question about it. No
so
question.
We talked about this idea of perpetual beta, and I'd love to dive in deeper there, but through the lens of an internal culture. So future readiness, I believe, is a way of being, and it is a dynamic capacity and capability. It's not a one and done activity or an annual thing that you check off your list. And it turns uncertainty into a strategic advantage. In fact, research shows that companies with a dedicated foresight methodology and resources are 33% more profitable and achieve a 200% higher growth rate than companies that don't. But the problem is, and you and I talked about this in our conversation a month ago, is that most leaders, they want a panacea, they want the easy answer. And you've even written before that the ad industry specifically, they've got to be a lot more nimbler and plan for more what ifs than it has in the past. And so I'm curious, how are you cultivating a nimble and future ready team and culture at Havas? And what's been maybe the most challenging or surprising about it?
I think the things we talked about earlier in terms of the mindset, you have to be restless and you have to be observant and you have to stay curious. You always have to ask yourself, okay, we've gotten this done. This is terrific. What else? What else could you do? And if you look at the industry, in most industries, they're set up to keep up with and deliver on the things right in front of you, right? What's your to-do list today? What's your meeting list today? We're going to get this product out the door. We're going to build this campaign. Oh, we got that campaign done. It's a good campaign. It's working great. Moving on. So you're going task to task to task. But if that brand was your company and you were the sole proprietor and also working the front counter and worrying about the design of the store, if you were all those people, think about a small business, founder-led business, what would you be doing to grow that business? And what would you be looking at in terms of the landscape, the customer base, where you could grow, where you could expand? And I think with the acceleration of business, some of which has happened through technology, it's hard for most companies not to keep their heads down and just get stuff done. And I think you have to force yourself to pull your head up and have people on your team, especially the strategists, who are always saying, okay, while we're running, while we're surfing, what's that ahead? What's on the horizon? Where's this going? And what if we did this? What if we did that? Recognizing that you might come up with 20 ideas, 18 of them might not make any sense. Those two are worth pulling on. Pull on those threads, see what comes of it. But if you don't anticipate and you don't stay a little bit restless that way, you're going to get caught by surprise, not in a good way. And that cultural process, I think, is hiring people who play well with others, encouraging a lot of collaboration, because it's when you have those beautiful collisions that people spark each other's ideas.
Yeah.
I think that myth of, we can work on Zoom forever and not interact, I don't buy into that. I think a lot of messy interaction or people together and brainstorming and thinking about things, asking people who don't work on a particular piece of business to look at that piece of business from the outside and say, what do you like? What don't you like? What do you see that's missing? Because sometimes an outside the category perspective can keep things fresh. So that you yourself and your clients don't get complacent or bored with what you're doing. So I think that constant hunger and curiosity is something you have to foster. And there's a lot of, as you know, programs like yours, there's a lot of outside stimulus and inspiration out there. And I'm not sure that enough companies, including agencies, take advantage of that. Yeah. What's the latest work? What's the greatest work? What surprised you? What's out there that you're jealous of? Look at that and bring that forth to the team and talk about it as much as you talk about your existing clients, because that's how you help your existing clients, is to bring that fresh perspective, that outside perspective, and think about them in a completely different new context.
Yeah. Well, what's coming up for me is, first of all, there's an intentionality that is really important. You have to get intentional about it both within your own life, but in terms of your team and across your company. There's 3 levels of intentionality, and providing unstructured thinking time, whatever that means to you individually as well as the team and company, is important. It's about empowering your people, promoting iterative processes, staying closely connected to customer needs and market trends, fostering this mindset of continuous learning and adaptability. You talked about encouraging cross-functional or collaboration. I think all these things are super important. And I would agree. And I happen to know because I'm talking to a lot of people in the market about it, right? It's not happening. That's part of what I loved about cutting my teeth in the agency world, because it was happening to a certain degree. But as I start to talk to larger companies or corporations or on the brand side, this work just isn't happening because people are so heads down. And to me, it's a massive missed opportunity. And it's really a shame, because what I've actually learned over the last 7 or 8 years is when this curious nature and all these sort of qualities that we're talking about become intrinsic to who you are, it's just how you wake up, who you are, and before you go to bed, there's a speed and efficiency that gets realized and compounds over time. I keep trying to figure out how to articulate this for people. I only know what my lived experience and what my body and brain has been experiencing the last however many years. But the way that I synthesize what I see, the questions I ask, it's but it started with me getting intentional, and I wasn't good at it always. It took practice, effort. But the flip side is I can do more with less, faster, and with more strategic clarity than someone who hasn't been moving through the world in this way. And that's why I fundamentally believe it's a superpower.
I think the way you just described that is fantastic, because again, it's so easy to react. We all have a ton to do today and tomorrow. And sometimes if you shorten and compress your horizon and worry less about the week's work and just think, okay, what's the one thing where I really want to, spike the ball today or push forward? And it doesn't have to be 10 things. It in the course of doing other things, what are those areas that you want to bring extra energy to? And a lot of what we do today is we deliver and work and share that work on screens, but we don't think out loud enough with other people. And I think
Yeah.
that when you talk about the culture, fostering a culture where, and even if you're doing things virtually, yes, there's going to be a presentation. Yes, there's going to be a meeting, but maybe before some of your work is done, you get on a call before that call to talk to one of your colleagues about, I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that. I have a few different ways in. What do you think? And worry less about the process and more about the ideas, and start to get ahead of where things could be. And you start to edit even before you write in a way, because you sifted out the more obvious places you might have gone. So I think to your point, you end up being a lot more productive because you waste less time because you've given yourself permission to explore the possibilities, right? You're not obsessed with following a straight line and getting into something that's right or acceptable. You're in a way saying anything's possible. Let's look at all these possibilities. Gee, which one of these feels best for the situation we're in? Actually, maybe it's more than one. I'll talk to a colleague or colleagues. Let's hash it out. Okay, what are the doors we want to go through? That collaboration and iteration accelerates things in a way that a lot of linear thinkers might think, oh, geez, that sounds messy. Yeah, it's intentionally messy, and it leads to better outcomes, and it leads to them faster.
Yeah. When I do workshops with leaders, I always talk about imagination training. We know from cognitive science and neuroscience, once you start training your brain this way, that things that would maybe seem shocking or surprising to others, while it may seem surprising or shocking in the moment, you're actually much more able to adapt, evolve, be strategic, have clarity where everybody else is still worrying about what the thing is. And that's like the pandemic. I was like, I'm on to like the next. I mean, yes, this happened, but like where we go from here. And I was able to adjust because I'd been cultivating this capability in my mind, body, and soul, if you will. And so now it's who I am. And I think the more people really start to understand this and also recognize that it's taken me years, and this is not a short-term plan. This is a journey. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Man, once you get through that first marathon, it's just, oh my gosh, how you can start to just take in new information or do things that you've never been done before, or challenge yourself or assess the situation is really quite remarkable in my experience.
And you talked about, I love that, because you talked earlier about human behavior. And at the end of the day, there are certain universal human truths, and people are curious by nature. And I think that the pressures of business have been such over the last several years that people are really concerned about getting it right and want to come in to a situation and have a solution and have it be acceptable. And they want to look smart. And it's much better to come in with smart questions than presume to know the answer. And that's where, to me, the curiosity comes in. And I think you do have to find people you're working with and foster a culture where you give that permission to, let's find the answer by asking better questions. And I think that if you give into that, which is much more human, it's how we operate, it's how we navigate around the streets of our city, or we choose what we're going to eat at night, what movie we're going to see, and everything else. Give into that curiosity and that wondering, and you'll find yourself a lot more productive and also a lot happier.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And that's why in my work, I always start with the humans. Like before we even jump into the job to be done, I do this in different ways, but I start with, okay, what are the cognitive biases, unhelpful assumptions, and beliefs and feelings that we have around things, whether it's the future of your company or your industry or whatever it is that we're trying to figure out. And you've got to start there and get everything out on the table, because then there you can start to emotionally separate yourself. Awareness is half the battle, and you cleanse the palate, I like to say. So then you can sort of move to the next phase of the journey where you're not like holding on to this idea or these ideas or this is how it's going to be, because probably not how it's all going to come to pass, right? And then you're able to move. Well, this part of the journey may take more time than you would have liked before you're like, okay, no, when are we going to figure out our long-term strategy, Regan? Like, come on. It's like, but
Exactly.
it's like you almost leapfrog in the follow-on cascades, as I like to call them, because you've done this sort of upfront work that creates all these blockages.
And that's really where technology fits in, right? Because when you do it that way, you get to the, ooh, we know what we want to do. This is exciting. How are we going to do that? And technology is often a great solve, especially when you're talking about innovation or innovative tech or emerging platforms
Yeah.
on how. But the how has a reason, right? The how now has a purpose. It's not, we're going to do this because we can, because if you approach it that way and it's tech first and not human first, then it's tech for tech's sake. And sometimes you forget that pause to say, yeah, but is that better? Or would you really do that? Or would you give that to your kids? Or any of the questions that should be going off in your head, as opposed to saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could go from here to here? And then you start asking, is there a way to do that? Is there a way to do that better or faster or cheaper? And that's where technology can be a great jumping off point to teleport you into the future in a very disruptive way, because you've asked the right question and you're now in the how phase of the process.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned earlier the notion of businesses being in pressure or under pressure. And obviously the marketing and advertising industry has actually been in a state of disruption for at least the last 3 decades, if not longer.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So the vibes are off, right? And have been for a while. And proactive approaches to reimagining or innovating your business model is more important than ever today. It extends beyond just the agency world. Research shows that the average business model has a lifespan of 3 to 5 years, down from 15 years, 50 years ago. And so I'm curious, what gaps or difficulties are you facing when anticipating or strategizing for Havas' future? And what wisdom would you offer for leaders who are struggling with similar challenges?
I think when you look at the marketing industry, it's important to always come back to, where do you add the most value? And I think there are some clients who have been wrestling for the last 10 years or so with the fracturing of media, the shortened attention spans. The average adult attention span now is like 8.25 seconds. The impact of any individual media platform is fractional compared to what it was. So it's no longer a spend to dominate scenario. A lot of the traditional measures of reach and frequency are less relevant than they were. It's about showing up where, when, and how it matters. It's getting the context right. Don't be afraid of your creativity. And your first job is to externalize the soul of that brand in such a way that it hits people in the heart. And then your target broadens, your appeal is exponential. And it all makes the whole thing a lot simpler, because you can spend a lot more time on okay, that's a great story. That's a true story. That's what people want. That's who we are. That's the connection we're trying to make. So then how do we do it? And then you can get into that and figure it out. And I think that in the quest for what's new, in the chase to reorganize things a certain way and all the different capabilities, the fracturing of media, I definitely think the industry has lost its way, depending on which place you talk about or which moment of time you talk about. The other thing I'll say, which is a bit provocative, is I think that agencies made a huge mistake on how they get paid. They used to get paid very simply off the top media commission, and they would have a certain fee from which, depending on the culture of the agency, they could fund iconoclastic talent or very client-friendly talent, or both. They could be a diamond-shaped structure. They could be a very hierarchical. They could do whatever they want. And if that worked for them and their clients, go for it. The minute you start doing billable hours, you're almost getting into which staff faces the clients versus which staff are cracking the campaigns. Are you staffing for day-to-day clients? Are you staffing for new business and growth? And if you look at analogous industries where there's IP and tech, entertainment, places like that, they have a long tail monetization of their IP. And the marketing industry just gives that away. They not only give it away in pitches, but they don't get paid on performance enough. You look at the meteoric growth of some businesses because of the marketing, because of the advertising. The fact that agencies aren't sharing in that growth and have a stake in that doesn't make any sense. There should be a lot more upside for all parties involved, because the money is there. It's in the market.
Right.
And the difference
reallocated.
It should be reallocated. And it also is measurable. Nowadays, it's all measurable. So you said you wanted to do this. We actually did that. That should be worth something, because it either saved you a lot of money or made you a lot of money, or both. So the money's there. It's not actually an expense. Great marketing is an investment that pays back 10, 20-fold. And agencies need to be a little more assertive about that. And I think marketing organizations and clients are challenged by some of the same things. It's almost a business that needs agents or advocates to mediate the service model, because I think if you fix the finances of the industry, you can get some of the talent and resources back where they were. But it's always being disrupted. As you said, there's always startup agencies, there's new tech disruptions. The adoption of AI is obviously something that's happening right now. You're seeing different models emerge concurrently of super small boutiques, very big networks, consolidation of those networked agencies into bigger holding companies, spin-off companies that don't even look like advertising agencies anymore. All of that's great. The more disruption you have, the more people are experimenting. If it works for the clients, if it works for the consumers, ultimately, whatever's new is a good idea. And if it runs into a brick wall or erodes over time as a model, that was great then. It may not be as relevant now. Let's move on to something new.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you shared, and I'll sum up some of it. What jumped out at me the most with one thing, and this is something actually that another guest said to me, and I was like, "This is brilliant." So, hello, Leslie from Intel. She said, "Customer needs are a trend that never goes out of style."
100%.
I was like, "That's brilliant." Like,
yeah.
That is brilliant. And so if you keep your eye on that is where the focus is and where you can create value, whatever your industry is. The disruptions are always going to be there, but it's really important to start there, start with the human aspects, and then the rest you need to go through on an exploratory journey to figure out.
That's exactly right. I think the business sometimes tries to complicate itself to look sophisticated, or it gets complicated because the world changes, technology comes along, media platforms emerge, all of that. But it should be a simple business. We should be in the business of empathy and ideas. And ultimately, it's about solving customer problems and solving your client's business challenge and ultimately solving consumer need. And if you do that, then the rest of it becomes part of that how conversation. And it's hard work, but it's a clear path.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Well, so I will bring us to a close with, where can people go to find out more about you and your work, Tim?
They can just either, if they're interested, that's an interesting question, actually. They can find me on LinkedIn. They can, if they're interested in what I write, they can go to my website. They can Google me. They can reach out through either of those sources to contact me directly. And yeah, I welcome any and all interactions, good, bad, and everything in the middle, because that's what keeps life interesting, right?
Right? Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and your brilliant insights, Tim. It has been enlightening, and I've had so much fun exploring with you today.
It's been a blast. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Fit. If you're listening, you're probably future curious. So follow me in my newsletter on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going and share your discoveries with the Future Fit community. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe, rate, and review Future Fit on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time.